Most people on death row fight to live. They appeal, they argue, they delay. But in the late 1990s, a woman in Arkansas did the opposite. She asked the state to kill her. She waived every appeal. She dismissed her lawyers. She refused to cooperate with efforts to save her life. And when the day finally came, she lay calmly on the execution table and waited. Her name was Christina Marie Riggs. Christina Marie Riggs was born in the early 1970s in Oklahoma, in the city of Luton, and she grew up mainly in Oklahoma City. Her childhood was unstable. Later in life, Christina would tell doctors and investigators that she had been sexually abused by a family member when she was young. That experience stayed with her. As a teenager, she began smoking, drinking alcohol, and using marijuana. She was not a violent person, but she struggled emotionally from a very early age. At 16 years old, Christina became pregnant. She gave birth and placed the baby up for adoption. People close to her later said this decision caused her lasting emotional pain, even though she rarely talked about it. Christina finished school and trained as a licensed practical nurse. She worked in home health care and later in hospitals. To co-workers, she appeared quiet, serious, and capable. She was not known for causing trouble or acting unstable at work. In the early 1990s, Christina became pregnant again. The child's father was not involved. She gave birth to a boy she named Justin. She raised him alone at first. A short time later, she met John Riggs. They married, and Christina later gave birth to a daughter named Shelby. For a brief period, Christina appeared to have the family life she had always wanted. But the marriage did not last. Christina later told authorities that the relationship was troubled and that she believed her husband was harsh toward Justin. The marriage ended in divorce. After the separation, Christina moved with her children to Sherwood, Arkansas, to be closer to her mother, hoping she would get more support. Instead, life became harder. Christina was now a single mother of 2 very young children. She worked long hospital shifts. Money was tight. She was constantly tired. Her mother helped with childcare, but Christina felt overwhelmed and emotionally alone. Justin was energetic and difficult to manage at times. Christina began to believe, rightly or wrongly, that people saw her son as a problem. She received complaints from daycare providers. She heard comments about how exhausting he was. Over time, she became convinced that no one wanted her children, and that belief grew darker. By 1997, Christina was severely depressed. She felt like a failure as a mother. She felt like a burden to her family. She believed her children would be better off not growing up unwanted or struggling. This belief is important because it explains her thinking, even though it does not excuse what she did. On November 4th, 1997, Christina went to work at the hospital. That day, she stole medications from her workplace. This was later confirmed by investigators. After her shift, she went to her mother's house and picked up her children. Her mother noticed nothing alarming. Christina was calm. She spoke normally. She paid money she owed. Then she left with Justin and Shelby. At her apartment that evening, Christina followed her usual routine. She fed the children. She spent time with them. She put them to bed. Nothing about the evening appeared unusual from the outside. Later that night, Christina gave both children medication that caused them to lose consciousness. Her intention, according to her own later confession, was that they would not be aware of what was happening. Things did not go as she planned. Justin reacted. Christina panicked. At that point, she took actions that resulted in the deaths of both children. These actions were later confirmed through evidence and her own recorded confession. Afterward, Christina placed the children together on her bed and covered them. She then wrote letters, one to her mother, one to her sister, and one to her ex-husband. In the letters, she explained that she feared her children would be separated, unwanted, or mistreated after her death. She wrote that she believed she was protecting them. Christina then attempted to take her own life. She did not die. On November 5th, Christina's mother went to the apartment after becoming worried. She discovered the children and Christina, who was still alive. She immediately called emergency services. Paramedics rushed Christina to the hospital and saved her life. Police began their investigation the same day. They found medications, syringes, and the letters. Everything pointed to Christina. When detectives questioned her at the hospital, Christina confessed. She did not deny anything. She described what she had done and why she believed she had done it. She was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. At trial, Christina pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Her defense argued that she was severely depressed and mentally broken at the time of the crime. Doctors testified about her trauma, depression, and emotional collapse. The prosecution argued that Christina knew what she was doing and planned it. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Christina was found guilty. During sentencing, Christina shocked everyone. She told the court she wanted the death penalty. She said she deserved to die. She said she wanted to be with her children. She refused appeals. She refused legal challenges. Doctors evaluated her multiple times and concluded that she understood her decision. On May 2nd, 2000, Christina Marie Riggs was executed by lethal injection in Arkansas. She was 28 years old. She became the first woman executed in the state since the 19th century. Her final words expressed remorse and sorrow for what she had done. That is the story, plainly, clearly, and factually. After Christina moved to Sherwood, Arkansas, her life became smaller and heavier at the same time. She lived in a modest apartment. Nothing fancy, just enough space for herself and her 2 children. Her mother lived nearby and helped with childcare, especially when Christina worked long hospital shifts. On the outside, it looked like Christina had support, but emotionally, she felt alone. Christina worked as a nurse at Baptist Medical Center. Nursing is not just physically demanding, it is emotionally draining. Long hours, constant responsibility, sick patients, life and death decisions. Christina was surrounded every day by pain, fear, and loss. Co-workers later said she did her job well. She followed instructions. She wasn't careless. She wasn't reckless. But she was quiet, withdrawn. She didn't socialize much. She didn't talk about her personal life. At home, things were harder. Justin, her son, was energetic and challenging. He had been diagnosed with attention and behavior issues. Christina loved him, but she struggled to cope. Daycare providers complained. Teachers reported problems. Christina took these reports personally. She didn't hear, "Your child needs help." She heard, "Your child is unwanted." Shelby was still a toddler, completely dependent, quiet compared to her brother. Christina often described Shelby as easy, which only deepened her fear that Justin was too much for the world. Over time, Christina began to believe something that was not true, but felt true to her. She believed that if she died, her children would suffer. She believed they would be separated because they had different fathers. She believed Justin would be labeled difficult and passed from home to home. She believed Shelby would grow up confused and abandoned. Most importantly, she believed she had already failed them. Friends and family later said Christina rarely asked for help. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to admit weakness. When people offered support, she often brushed it off. Inside, her depression deepened, quietly and steadily. In the weeks leading up to November 1997, Christina's behavior changed subtly. Not enough to alarm anyone, but enough to matter in hindsight. She became more withdrawn, more serious, more focused. She began thinking about death, not just her own, But what would happen after? And that's where her thinking became dangerous. On November 4th, Christina went to work as usual. No breakdown, no dramatic moment. She completed her shift, interacted normally, and left the hospital. But before leaving, she took medications from the hospital supply. This was not accidental. This was not careless. It was preparation. After work, she went to her mother's home to pick up Justin and Shelby. Her mother later said Christina seemed calm. She paid money she owed. She hugged the children. She answered questions normally. Nothing about that visit suggested what was coming. Back at the apartment, the evening unfolded like any other. Dinner, television, bath time, bedtime. Christina tucked her children in. She kissed them. She adjusted their blankets. There was no anger, no violence, no chaos. Later that night, Christina acted on the plan she had been building in her mind. She gave her children medication intended to make them sleep. According to her later confession, she believed this would prevent fear or awareness. This is critical to understanding her mindset. She believed she was minimizing suffering. But things did not go according to her plan. One child reacted unexpectedly. At that moment, Christina panicked. And in that panic, she made choices that ended the lives of both children. This is not speculation. This is not interpretation. This is what Christina herself later admitted. Afterward, Christina placed Justin and Shelby together on her bed and covered them as if they were sleeping. She did not leave them where they fell. She did not abandon them. This detail would later haunt everyone who heard it. She then sat down and wrote letters. In those letters, Christina did not blame anyone else. She did not express hatred. She expressed fear, guilt, and what she believed was love. She wrote that she could not bear the thought of her children suffering without her. She wrote that she believed she was protecting them. She wrote that she wanted to be with them. After writing the letters, Christina attempted to take her own life, but she did not die. The next day, her mother came to the apartment after feeling something was wrong. When she discovered the scene, she immediately called emergency services. Christina was rushed to the hospital and survived. Justin and Shelby did not. Police began their investigation immediately. They found medications, syringes, and the letters. When detectives questioned Christina at the hospital, she confessed. She did not ask for a lawyer at first. She did not deny responsibility. She did not minimize what she had done. She explained her thinking calmly. She said she believed her children would be better off not living without her. That confession became one of the strongest pieces of evidence in the case. Christina was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. As the case moved toward trial, the prosecution and defense prepared very different narratives. The prosecution focused on planning. They emphasized the stolen medications, the letters, the order of events. They argued Christina knew exactly what she was doing. The defense focused on her mental state. They brought in doctors who described years of depression, trauma, and emotional collapse. They argued Christina's thinking was distorted beyond reason. The jury listened to both sides. In the end, they rejected the insanity defense. Christina was found guilty. At sentencing, Christina shocked everyone by asking for the death penalty. She said she deserved to die. She said she wanted to be with her children. She said she did not want to live. Doctors evaluated her again. They concluded she understood what she was choosing. Christina waived all appeals. On May 2, 2000, Christina Marie Riggs was executed by lethal injection in Arkansas. She was 28 years old. Her final words expressed sorrow and regret. And even now, decades later, her case remains one of the most disturbing and debated executions in modern American history. Not because of doubt about guilt, but because of the question it leaves behind. When someone is broken enough to destroy everything they love, What should justice look like? After Christina Riggs was arrested, the people around her began to see two very different versions of the same woman. To investigators, she was calm, cooperative, and direct. She answered questions clearly. She did not act confused. She did not claim memory loss. She explained what she had done and why she believed she had done it. To her family, she was still the same Christina they had always known: quiet, withdrawn, deeply sad, and fragile. Her mother later said she struggled to reconcile the daughter she raised with the reality of what had happened inside that apartment. As the case moved forward, investigators began reconstructing Christina's life in detail, not just the night of the crime. They interviewed family members, co-workers, former friends, and childcare providers. They reviewed medical records, employment records, and personal history. What emerged was not a sudden snap, but a long, slow collapse. Christina had never been someone who handled stress well. From a young age, she internalized pain rather than expressing it. She rarely asked for help. When she struggled, she isolated herself. Her work as a nurse added to that pressure. Nursing required constant emotional control. Christina was expected to be calm in emergencies, compassionate with patients, and precise with medications. Mistakes were not an option. Over time, this environment intensified her tendency to suppress her own emotions. Co-workers later said Christina never talked about her home life. They knew she had children, but she rarely shared details. When she did, it was usually about being tired or overwhelmed. At home, Christina's world revolved around Justin and Shelby. Justin needed attention and structure. Christina tried to provide that, but she often felt she was failing. Every complaint from daycare felt like confirmation of her worst fears, that her son was too much, and that she was not a good enough mother. Shelby, still very young, became a source of both comfort and anxiety. Christina worried constantly about what would happen to her if she were left alone in the world. As these fears grew, Christina's thinking became more rigid. She stopped seeing possibilities. She stopped imagining solutions. Instead, she fixated on one belief: that the future held nothing but suffering, for herself and for her children. This belief did not come from logic. It came from depression. But to Christina, it felt like truth. By the time November arrived, Christina had already emotionally withdrawn from the world. She went through the motions of daily life, but inside she felt empty and defeated. On the day of the crime, nothing outwardly dramatic happened. That's one of the reasons the case remained so unsettling. There was no argument, no confrontation, no external trigger. The decision came from inside her. After her children were gone and she survived her own attempt, Christina was placed under guard at the hospital. Officers were present at all times. Family members were restricted from seeing her initially. When detectives questioned her, they recorded the interview. Christina spoke in a flat, subdued tone. She explained that she believed her children would be unwanted and separated after her death. She said she could not stand the idea of them suffering. She did not describe anger toward them. She did not describe hatred. She described despair. That interview would later be played in court. When Christina was formally charged, the gravity of the case became clear immediately. Prosecutors sought the death penalty from the beginning. As the trial approached, both sides prepared extensively. The prosecution built a case around planning and intent. They focused on the medications taken from the hospital, the timing of events, and the letters written afterward. Their argument was simple. Christina knew what she was doing, and she chose to do it. The defense did not dispute the facts. Instead, they focused on Christina's mental health. They presented expert testimony from psychologists and psychiatrists who had evaluated her. These experts described years of untreated or poorly treated depression, compounded by trauma, isolation, and overwhelming guilt. They testified that Christina's thinking at the time of the crime was severely distorted, not disconnected from reality, but narrowed to a single, hopeless conclusion. Family members testified as well. They described a woman who had been struggling for years, who carried immense shame and sadness, and who believed she was failing everyone around her. Christina herself testified. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend her actions. She said she loved her children. She said she believed she had no other option. She said she wished she could undo what she had done. The jury deliberated. When they returned, they found Christina guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. Then came sentencing. This was the moment when Christina surprised everyone. Instead of allowing her attorneys to argue for her life, she addressed the court and asked for the death penalty. She said she deserved it. She said she wanted to die. She said she wanted to be with her children. The courtroom fell silent. Judges were required to ensure that Christina understood what she was saying. Over the following months, she underwent repeated mental evaluations. Each time, doctors concluded that she understood the nature of her sentence and the consequences of waiving appeals. Christina continued to refuse legal challenges. She did not want delays. She did not want negotiations. She did not want mercy. She was transferred to death row. Her time there was short compared to most condemned inmates. Correctional officers later described her as quiet and compliant. She followed routines. She rarely spoke. She spent much of her time alone. She wrote letters. She prayed. She reflected. As her execution date approached, last-minute attempts were made by outside advocates to intervene, arguing that Christina's mental illness made her consent invalid. The courts rejected those efforts. On the day of her execution, Christina declined visitors, though she was allowed them. She accepted a final meal. She was calm. When she was brought into the execution chamber, there were delays related to the procedure. She remained composed. Before the execution began, Christina spoke. She apologized. She expressed sorrow for the pain she caused. She spoke about her children. Then the sentence was carried out. Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead on May 2nd, 2000. She was 28 years old. Her death did not bring closure. Instead, it left behind a case that continues to unsettle people because it refuses to fit into simple categories. She wasn't innocent. She was not remorseless. She was not delusional in the legal sense, and she didn't want to live. That combination, more than the crime itself, is what keeps her story alive. To understand Christina Marie Riggs, investigators and doctors had to go far back, long before Arkansas, long before the hospital, long before Justin and Shelby were born. Christina's childhood in Oklahoma was unstable. Her parents separated when she was young, and she moved between households. Later in life, Christina told counselors and investigators that she had been sexually abused by a relative during her early years. This was not something she spoke about openly. It was something she carried quietly. As a teenager, she struggled to cope. She began smoking and drinking early, then using marijuana. People around her described her as withdrawn, not rebellious. She wasn't acting out to get attention. She was numbing herself. At 16, Christina became pregnant. She carried the pregnancy to term and placed the baby up for adoption. That decision weighed heavily on her. Though she rarely talked about it, doctors later said it shaped how she viewed motherhood, guilt, and responsibility. After high school, Christina trained as a licensed practical nurse. Nursing gave her structure. It gave her purpose. For the first time, she felt useful. She worked in home health care, then later in hospitals. Co-workers said she was competent and careful. She wasn't warm or outgoing, but she was reliable. In her early 20s, Christina became pregnant again. This time, she kept the child. Her son Justin was born in the early 1990s. His father was not involved, and Christina raised him alone at first. Justin was energetic, impulsive, and demanding. Christina loved him deeply, but she struggled. When daycare workers complained or caregivers expressed exhaustion, Christina internalized it as rejection, not just of Justin, but of herself as a mother. A few years later, Christina met John Riggs. They married, and she soon became pregnant again. Their daughter Shelby was born in the mid-1990s. For a short time, Christina believed she finally had stability, a family, a job, and a future. But the marriage deteriorated quickly. Christina later said the relationship was marked by conflict and fear. She believed her husband was harsh toward Justin. Whether or not others witnessed this directly, Christina believed it deeply. The marriage ended in divorce. After the separation, Christina moved to Sherwood, Arkansas, to be closer to her mother. She hoped family support would help her manage work and childcare. Instead, she became overwhelmed. She worked long shifts at Baptist Medical Center. Nursing required focus, discipline, and emotional restraint. Christina gave that energy to her patients and had very little left for herself. At home, she felt trapped between responsibility and exhaustion. Justin's behavior issues continued. Christina received complaints from daycare. Each complaint reinforced her growing belief that her son was unwanted. Shelby, still a toddler, was quiet and dependent, which fed Christina's fear of what would happen to her without a mother. Over time, Christina's thinking narrowed. She stopped imagining solutions like therapy, community support, or help from others. She stopped seeing the future as flexible. Instead, she became convinced of one thing: that her children's lives would be worse without her. This belief became obsessive. By late 1997, Christina was deeply depressed. She felt like a failure. She felt like a burden. She believed her children were suffering because of her inability to give them a better life. And in that state of mind, she made a fatal decision. On November 4th, 1997, Christina went to work as usual. She completed her shift. She interacted normally with coworkers. But before leaving, she took medications from the hospital supply. Investigators later confirmed this was intentional. After work, she went to her mother's house and picked up Justin and Shelby. Her mother later said Christina seemed calm. She paid money she owed. She showed no signs of distress. Back at her apartment, the evening followed its usual routine: dinner, playtime, bedtime. Christina tucked her children in. She kissed them. She adjusted their blankets. Later that night, Christina gave her children medication intended to make them lose consciousness. According to her later confession, she believed this would prevent fear. What happened next did not go according to her plan. One child reacted. Christina panicked. In that panic, she took actions that caused the deaths of both children. This is not speculation. This is based on her own confession and physical evidence. Afterward, Christina placed Justin and Shelby together on her bed and covered them. She then sat down and wrote letters. In those letters, she explained her thinking. She wrote that she feared her children would be separated because they had different fathers. She wrote that she believed no one wanted them. She wrote that she didn't want them to grow up knowing she had taken her own life. She then attempted to end her life. She did not succeed. The next day, her mother came to the apartment after growing worried. What she discovered changed everything. Emergency services were called immediately. Christina was rushed to the hospital and survived. Her children did not. Police began their investigation. They found medications, syringes, and the letters. Everything pointed to Christina. When detectives questioned her at the hospital, Christina confessed. She spoke calmly. She did not deny responsibility. She explained that she believed she was protecting her children from suffering. She was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. At trial, Christina pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Her defense presented doctors who testified that she suffered from severe depression and long-term trauma. They argued that her thinking was deeply distorted at the time of the crime. The prosecution argued that Christina planned the killings and understood what she was doing. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Christina was found guilty. During sentencing, Christina stunned the courtroom. She asked for the death penalty. She said she deserved it. She said she wanted to die. She said she wanted to be with her children. Despite efforts by her attorneys, Christina waived all appeals. Doctors evaluated her repeatedly and concluded she understood the consequences of her decision. On May 2, 2000, Christina Marie Riggs was executed by lethal injection in Arkansas. She was 28 years old. Her final words expressed remorse and sorrow for what she had done. Her case did not end with her death. It became a lasting example of how mental illness, guilt, motherhood, and punishment can collide, with consequences that can never be undone. As the trial moved closer, Christina Riggs became the center of a case that quietly unsettled everyone involved, not because the facts were unclear, but because her behavior didn't fit expectations. Most defendants accused of killing their own children either deny responsibility, blame someone else, or collapse emotionally in court. Christina did none of that. She sat quietly beside her attorneys. She listened. She answered questions when asked. She rarely showed outward emotion. This calmness would later be interpreted in 2 very different ways. To prosecutors, it suggested control and awareness. To the defense, it suggested emotional numbness, a hallmark of severe depression. During testimony, family members described Christina as a deeply private person. She did not share her pain easily. Even when she was struggling, she tried to appear functional. Her mother testified that Christina often seemed exhausted and overwhelmed, but never asked for help directly. Co-workers testified about her work as a nurse. They said she followed procedures carefully. She was trusted with medications. She was not known for reckless behavior. This testimony helped the prosecution argue that Christina understood medications, dosages, and consequences. The defense acknowledged this, but argued that professional knowledge does not protect someone from mental collapse. Doctors called by the defense explained that Christina's depression was not sudden. It had been building for years. They described her thought patterns as rigid and hopeless. Once she reached the belief that her children's futures were doomed, she became unable to imagine alternatives. One psychiatrist testified that Christina believed death was the only way to stop suffering, for herself and for her children. The prosecution challenged this aggressively. They pointed out that Christina waited until the children were asleep, that she wrote letters afterward, that she attempted to take her own life only after her children were gone. To them, these were not the actions of someone unaware of right and wrong. The jury listened to weeks of testimony. When deliberations ended, the verdict was clear. Christina Riggs was guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. The sentencing phase that followed was emotionally charged. Victim impact statements were read. The court reviewed aggravating and mitigating factors. But what stood out most was Christina herself. Instead of asking for mercy, she spoke plainly. She said she deserved the death penalty. She said she did not want to live. She said living with what she had done was impossible. Her attorneys objected. They argued that her request proved she was still deeply depressed and suicidal. But the court required something else, proof that she did not understand her choice. Multiple mental health evaluations followed. Doctors asked her the same questions again and again. Did she understand she would be executed? Yes. Did she understand she could appeal? Yes. Did she understand that waiving appeals would lead to death? Yes. Each time, the answer was the same. The court ruled that Christina was competent. With that ruling, the case moved faster than most death penalty cases ever do. Christina was transferred to the McPherson Unit, Arkansas's female death row facility. Her time there was short. Correctional officers later described her as quiet, compliant, and withdrawn. She followed routines. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She spent much of her time alone. She wrote letters. She reflected. She prayed. She did not ask for favors. She did not seek attention. She did not try to delay what was coming. As the execution date approached, outside groups began to speak out. Mental health advocates argued that allowing a suicidal person to volunteer for execution was ethically wrong. Others argued that Christina had exercised her legal rights and that the sentence was just. The courts did not intervene. On the day of her execution, Christina was moved to the Cummins Unit, where executions are carried out in Arkansas. She declined visitors, though she was allowed them. She was offered a final meal, which she accepted. Witnesses later said she appeared calm, not defiant, and not fearful. When she was brought into the execution chamber, the procedure did not go smoothly. Medical staff had difficulty establishing intravenous access. This caused delays. Throughout this process, Christina remained silent. She did not protest. She did not ask for a pause. She did not change her mind. Before the execution began, Christina was allowed to speak. She apologized for the pain she caused. She expressed sorrow. She spoke of her children. She did not justify what she had done. Then the sentence was carried out. Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead on May 2, 2000, at 28 years old. She became the first woman executed in Arkansas since the mid-19th century. Her execution did not end discussion of the case. In the years that followed, her story continued to surface in debates about mental illness and capital punishment. Her name appeared in academic journals, legal discussions, and documentaries. Some people viewed her as a calculating murderer who chose death over responsibility. Others viewed her as a deeply depressed woman who used the justice system to end her life. What makes her case so disturbing is that both interpretations draw from the same facts. She planned the crime. She confessed. She was mentally ill. She asked to die. All of those things are true at the same time. And that is why Christina Riggs remains one of the most unsettling cases in modern American true crime. Because it forces us to confront a question that has no clean answer. When someone destroys everything they love, and then asks the state to destroy them too, what is justice supposed to look like? After Christina Riggs was sentenced, the people closest to her were left in a state of shock that never fully lifted. Her mother struggled the most. She had helped care for Justin and Shelby. She had trusted Christina. And now she was forced to reconcile two impossible realities at once: the daughter she loved and the actions that had taken her grandchildren's lives. Family members visited Christina when they were allowed. Those visits were quiet and restrained. Christina did not argue about the verdict. She did not express anger toward the system. She did not ask for help in overturning her sentence. Instead, she spoke about guilt. She told relatives she did not deserve forgiveness. She said living felt heavier than dying. She said every day she woke up reminded her of what she had done. This attitude continued after she was transferred to death row. Christina's cell was small and bare. Her daily life followed a strict routine: meals at set times, limited recreation, long hours alone. She spent much of that time writing letters and reading. She rarely watched television. She did not seek friendships with other inmates. Correctional officers later said Christina kept to herself. She followed every rule. She did not cause disruptions. She did not complain. What stood out to them most was how resigned she seemed. Most people on death row cling to time. Even those who accept their sentence still pursue appeals because time means hope, or at least delay. Christina did the opposite. When lawyers contacted her about filing appeals, she refused to sign paperwork. When judges asked if she understood she could live for years while her case was reviewed, she said she understood, and said she did not want that. Mental health professionals continued evaluating her during this time. They noted that Christina showed signs of ongoing depression, but she remained oriented and aware. She understood where she was. She understood what was coming. She understood that death was permanent. Those findings cleared the final legal barriers. As her execution date approached, public attention increased. News outlets revisited the case. Headlines focused on the unusual speed of the execution and on the fact that Christina had requested it. Some articles framed her as a woman who had given up. Others framed her as manipulative. Others focused on the children. None of them could fully explain her. In the final weeks, Christina wrote more letters. Some were addressed to family members. Others were never sent. In them, she expressed regret and sorrow. She did not attempt to justify her actions. She repeatedly described herself as undeserving of life. Witnesses later said she spoke often about wanting to be reunited with her children. This belief, that death would bring reunion, was one of the few things that seemed to bring her comfort. The night before the execution, Christina slept little. She did not ask for sedatives. She did not make last-minute requests. On the day itself, she was transferred early to the facility where executions were carried out. The process followed standard protocol. She was given the opportunity to meet with a chaplain. She was offered visitors. She declined most offers. She accepted a final meal. Those present later described her demeanor as calm and subdued. She did not appear panicked. She did not appear relieved. When she was brought into the execution chamber, the process took longer than expected due to technical difficulties. During this time, Christina remained silent. She did not protest or ask questions. Before the execution began, she was allowed to speak. Her words were brief. She apologized for the pain she had caused. She expressed remorse. She mentioned her children. She did not argue that she had been treated unfairly. She did not blame anyone else. Then the sentence was carried out. Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead that evening. She was 28 years old. In the days that followed, reactions were mixed. Some people believed justice had been served and that the case should be closed. Others felt deeply unsettled. Mental health advocates criticized the execution, arguing that Christina's desire to die should have disqualified her from being executed. Some legal scholars questioned whether the system had unintentionally allowed suicide through execution. Families of the victims, including Christina's own family, were left with grief that had no resolution. Over time, Christina Riggs's case became a reference point in discussions about capital punishment and mental illness. It was cited in court opinions, academic writing, and documentaries. Not because the facts were unclear, but because the meaning was. She was a mother who loved her children. She was a woman suffering from severe depression. She committed an irreversible crime. She asked to be executed. All of those statements are true, and taken together, they make her story one of the most disturbing and difficult cases in modern American criminal history. Because it forces a question that still has no answer. When punishment, guilt, illness, and consent all collide, where does responsibility truly end? After Christina Marie Riggs was executed, the case did not fade away quietly. In the days immediately following her death, Arkansas newspapers, national outlets, and television programs revisited the story from the beginning. Many reports focused on the unusual speed of the execution and the fact that Christina had actively requested it. Others returned to the crime itself, retracing her life and the night everything ended. But the people most affected were not commentators or legal experts. They were the family members left behind. Christina's mother withdrew from public attention almost entirely. Friends later said she carried overwhelming guilt, replaying memories and conversations in her mind, wondering if there had been a moment she could have intervened. She had helped care for Justin and Shelby. She had seen them often. And yet, like everyone else, she had not imagined what was happening inside her daughter's mind. Justin and Shelby were laid to rest together. Those who attended the services later described the atmosphere as heavy and quiet. There was no sense of closure. There was no resolution. Only grief layered upon grief. As months passed, the case began to settle into public memory, but not in a simple way. Unlike many crimes, there was no mystery left to solve. Christina had confessed. The evidence was clear. The sentence had been carried out. And yet, people continued to talk about it. One reason was Christina's age. At 28, she was one of the youngest women executed in the modern era of capital punishment. Another was her profession. As a nurse, she had spent her working life caring for others. That contrast troubled many people. But the strongest reason was this. Christina Riggs did not behave like most people facing execution. She did not fight. She did not bargain. She did not claim injustice. She accepted death. That fact alone kept her case alive in public discussion. Documentaries and books began referencing her story when discussing parents who kill their children. Her case was often cited alongside others, but it stood apart because of her cooperation with the system and her refusal to seek mercy. Mental health professionals also continued discussing her case quietly in academic settings, not to excuse her actions, but to understand how untreated or poorly treated depression can narrow a person's thinking until they believe there is only one outcome. Over time, the language around the case shifted. Early coverage focused on shock and outrage. Later, coverage focused on discomfort. Because as years passed, people began asking a different question. Not, what happened? But how did no one see it coming? Friends remembered Christina as distant, but functional. Co-workers remembered her as reliable. Family remembered her as tired and sad, but loving. There had been no dramatic warning signs, no threats, no violence in her past. Her decline had been quiet. That quietness became part of her legacy. The case also affected how hospitals and child care providers in the region approached mental health discussions. While no single case can change systems overnight, Christina's story was referenced in conversations about burnout, depression, and the hidden emotional toll of caregiving professions. As for Christina herself, she remained a complicated figure. Some people refused to speak her name without anger. Others spoke it with sadness. Very few spoke it with certainty. Years later, when her case was revisited in true crime discussions, one detail continued to stand out to listeners and readers. Christina never claimed her actions were right. She never said she was justified. She never asked for forgiveness. She said she was sorry. She said she was broken. And she said she did not want to live with what she had done. That honesty, unsettling as it was, made her story difficult to dismiss because it removed the distance people often rely on when judging crime. She was not a stranger. She was not a monster hiding in plain sight. She was a mother who had unraveled slowly, quietly, and catastrophically. And when the unraveling was complete, there was no way to rewind time. Today, Christina Riggs's name still appears in discussions about capital punishment, mental illness, and parental violence. But beyond those discussions, her story remains a reminder of something far simpler and far more painful. That suffering does not always announce itself. That despair can exist behind routine and responsibility. And that sometimes, by the time anyone realizes how far someone has fallen, the damage is already irreversible. Justin and Shelby are remembered not for how they died, but for who they were. Two children who trusted the world around them and never had the chance to grow beyond it. And Christina Marie Riggs remains one of the most haunting figures in modern true crime, not because her case was unclear, but because it was tragically, unmistakably clear. As years passed, Christina Riggs's case slowly shifted from headline news into something quieter, but more lasting. A reference point. Her name no longer appeared every week, but it never disappeared either. It resurfaced whenever conversations turned to mothers who kill their children, to mental illness hidden behind ordinary lives, and to executions carried out without resistance. People who studied the case closely noticed something unusual about how Christina spoke about herself. In every interview, every evaluation, every letter, she used the same language. She described herself as a failure, as someone who caused harm simply by existing. She did not describe anger at the world. She described shame. This mattered because it helped explain why her decline went unnoticed. Christina did not lash out. She did not threaten. She did not demand attention. She withdrew. Her depression did not look dramatic. It looked like exhaustion. It looked like silence. It looked like someone doing what they had to do each day and then collapsing inward when no one was watching. People who later reviewed her case pointed out that Christina rarely framed her thoughts in terms of what she wanted. She framed them in terms of what she believed others wanted or didn't want. She believed her children were unwanted. She believed she herself was unwanted. Over time, those beliefs hardened into certainty. This is how her thinking narrowed, not suddenly, not explosively, but slowly, over years. By the time she reached November of 1997, her inner world had become very small. There were no alternative futures in her mind, no possibility of improvement, no belief that help could change anything, only endings. After her execution, the prison staff who had interacted with Christina spoke quietly about her demeanor. They described someone who did not argue with fate, someone who accepted consequences without drama, someone who appeared emotionally numb, not relieved. One officer later said that what stayed with him was not her crime, but her resignation. It was like she had already died inside, he said. That description echoed what many mental health professionals later said when reviewing her case. Christina did not behave like someone choosing between life and death. She behaved like someone who believed life was already over. In the years that followed, documentaries and articles continued to revisit the case. Each time, the same details returned: her profession as a nurse, her age, her refusal to appeal, her calm demeanor. But something else began to emerge in later retellings: a focus on the people around her. Her co-workers, who remembered a quiet woman who never complained. Her family, who remembered someone who loved her children but never forgave herself. Her mother, who lived with the knowledge that she had seen Christina just hours before everything ended and had seen nothing wrong. This aspect of the story resonated with many people because it raised a frightening possibility that someone can be deeply unwell and still appear functional, that someone can be planning something irreversible while paying bills, working shifts, and answering questions politely. Christina Riggs did not fit the stereotype of someone about to snap. She fit the stereotype of someone barely holding on. As the case aged, another shift happened. The focus moved away from Christina herself and toward Justin and Shelby. People began asking who they might have become. Justin, energetic and challenging, might have grown into someone creative, passionate, and resilient. Shelby, quiet and gentle, might have found her voice with time. They were never given that chance, and in remembering them, many people struggled with how to remember Christina. Was she a loving mother who became ill beyond repair? Or was she someone who made a series of conscious choices that cannot be softened by explanation? The truth sits uncomfortably in between. Christina loved her children, Christina killed her children. Both statements are true. And that duality is what makes her story so hard to process. There is no version of this case where everyone is satisfied. There is no ending that feels whole. Even the execution, which is supposed to represent finality, did not bring resolution. Instead, it left behind a silence filled with unanswered questions. Not legal questions, human ones. Questions about how much suffering can hide behind routine. Questions about how responsibility and illness intersect. Questions about how close despair can live to normal life. Christina Riggs's story endures not because it is sensational, but because it is unsettling in a quiet way. It reminds us that tragedy does not always announce itself with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in normalcy, and by the time it is visible, it is already too late. As time went on, people who had known Christina Riggs before everything happened began revisiting small, ordinary moments that suddenly felt important. A co-worker remembered how Christina used to volunteer for extra shifts, even when she looked exhausted. At the time, it was seen as dedication. In hindsight, it looked like avoidance, a way to stay busy so she wouldn't have to sit alone with her thoughts. Another co-worker remembered Christina standing quietly at the medication station, double-checking labels again and again. She wasn't careless. If anything, she was overly cautious. That detail would later matter when people tried to understand how someone trained to care for others could end up causing harm. At home, Christina's routine rarely changed. Mornings were rushed, evenings were quiet. She did not go out much. She did not date after her divorce. Her world became smaller, revolving almost entirely around work and her children. Family members later said that Christina talked often about being tired, but rarely about being sad. When people asked how she was doing, she would say she was fine or managing. No one recalls her asking for help directly. Her mother later said something that stayed with investigators. She never said she was drowning. She just kept swimming until she couldn't anymore. As the case continued to be discussed in later years, mental health professionals pointed out that Christina's beliefs about her children being unwanted were not based on facts, but on perception. Justin had challenges, but he was loved. Shelby was young and vulnerable, but she had family. But depression does not operate on evidence. It operates on certainty, a certainty that feels unshakable to the person experiencing it. By the time Christina reached that final week in November, her thinking had become rigid. She was no longer weighing options. She was executing a conclusion she believed was inevitable. When investigators reviewed her actions, one thing stood out. There was no sign of impulsive rage. There was no argument that triggered the event. There was no outside pressure pushing her over the edge. The decision came from inside her, fully formed. That fact troubled many people more than anything else, because it suggested that what happened was not a loss of control, but a loss of hope. During her confession, Christina used careful language. She spoke about her children in gentle terms. She did not describe anger. She described fear. Fear of the future. Fear of abandonment. Fear of suffering. She said she believed she was preventing pain. This belief would never be accepted as justification, but it became central to understanding her actions. In court, when photographs and evidence were presented, Christina often looked down. She did not react dramatically. She did not turn away. She sat quietly, absorbing everything. Observers later said she seemed to accept every word as deserved. During sentencing, when Christina asked for the death penalty, some people in the courtroom thought it was a strategy, a way to appear remorseful or to influence the judge. But over time, it became clear that it was not strategy. She never changed her position. Even when told she could live for years if she appealed, she refused. Even when attorneys warned her that death was permanent, She said she understood. She did not frame death as escape. She framed it as consequence. After her execution, some people expected the case to close. It didn't. Instead, it entered a different phase, one of reflection. Parents read about it and felt fear. Caregivers read about it and felt unease. Mental health professionals read about it and felt alarm. Because Christina Riggs did not look like the stereotype of someone capable of such an act. She looked like someone overwhelmed, exhausted, and silently unraveling. In later years, when the case was mentioned in discussions or documentaries, one detail often returned. Christina never said she hated her children. She said she loved them. That truth makes the story harder, not easier. It forces people to confront the uncomfortable reality that love alone is not enough to prevent tragedy when mental illness distorts perception. Justin and Shelby remain at the center of the story, even as the focus shifts around them. They were children who trusted the adults around them. They lived ordinary lives. They did not choose any of this. Their lives ended, not because they were unwanted, but because someone who loved them believed they were. That belief, false as it was, proved fatal. Christina Riggs's story does not resolve neatly. It does not offer a lesson that feels satisfying. It leaves behind grief, questions, and a lingering discomfort. And perhaps that is why it continues to be told, not to shock, not to sensationalize, but to remind people how quietly despair can grow and how devastating the consequences can be when it goes unseen. As the years went by, people who studied Christina Riggs's case noticed that what happened was not the result of a single bad day. It was the end point of a life shaped by unresolved pain, silence, and isolation. Christina had learned early in life to keep things to herself. When she was abused as a child, she did not have the language or support to process it. When she became pregnant as a teenager and gave a child up for adoption, she carried that loss quietly. Each experience reinforced the same internal message: endure, don't speak, don't burden others. That pattern followed her into adulthood. Becoming a nurse gave Christina structure and a sense of purpose, but it also reinforced the idea that her role was to care for others, not to be cared for. She learned how to treat pain in patients, how to remain calm in emergencies, how to compartmentalize emotion. What she never learned was how to ask for help when she herself was breaking. After her divorce, that pressure intensified. Christina did not see herself as someone allowed to fail. She believed that if she struggled, it meant she was weak. If she asked for help, it meant she was a burden. So she said nothing. She worked longer hours, she slept less, she withdrew more. People around her saw fatigue. They did not see despair. Justin's challenges became a focal point for her anxiety. Each complaint from daycare, each comment about his behavior, felt like proof that she was failing him. Over time, her worry shifted into certainty. Certainty that the world would not be kind to him. Shelby, still very young, became the symbol of vulnerability in Christina's mind. Christina worried obsessively about who would care for her, how she would be treated, and whether she would be loved if Christina were gone. Instead of seeing family, social services, or time as potential supports, Christina's depression erased those possibilities. In her mind, the future closed in. By the time she made her decision, she was not weighing pros and cons. She was acting on what felt like an unavoidable conclusion. That is what makes the case so disturbing. Not that Christina planned, but that she believed planning was mercy. When the crime was discovered and Christina survived, the shock rippled outward quickly. Police officers who responded described the scene as quiet and still. There was no sign of struggle in the apartment. Everything looked ordinary, except for the irreversible outcome. At the hospital, Christina was guarded and monitored. When detectives questioned her, She spoke plainly. She did not try to manipulate the narrative. She did not attempt to soften what she had done. She explained her thinking in simple terms. That honesty shaped the entire case. There was no mystery to unravel. There was only a question to answer: responsibility. In court, that question dominated everything. Jurors were not asked to decide whether Christina was depressed. Everyone agreed she was. They were asked whether she knew what she was doing. And based on the evidence, the timing, the preparation, the letters, the confession, they concluded that she did. That decision sealed her fate. After sentencing, Christina's refusal to appeal became a defining feature of the case. Judges were cautious. They questioned her repeatedly. They made sure she understood the finality of execution. Each time, she said she did. And each time, she refused to change her mind. In the months leading up to her execution, Christina lived quietly. She did not grant interviews. She did not attempt to shape public opinion. She did not portray herself as a victim. She accepted the punishment. That acceptance unsettled many people, because it blurred the line between punishment and consent. On the day of the execution, witnesses later said Christina appeared composed. She followed instructions. She spoke briefly. She expressed remorse. And then her life ended. For some, that was the end of the story. For others, it was the beginning of a deeper unease. In the years that followed, Christina Riggs's case was cited again and again, not because of uncertainty about what happened, but because of discomfort with how it ended. People asked whether a system designed to punish crime is equipped to handle people who no longer want to live. They asked whether accepting responsibility should ever include accepting death. They asked whether mental illness can coexist with legal competence, and what that means when the consequence is irreversible. There are no simple answers. What remains is the human cost. 2 children who never grew up, a family left with permanent grief, and a woman whose life ended not in redemption, but in silence. Christina Riggs's story continues to be told not because it is sensational, but because it is unsettling in its normality. She was not hiding in the shadows. She was not a stranger. She was someone people worked with, lived near, trusted. And that reality forces a difficult truth, that sometimes the most devastating tragedies are not caused by obvious evil, but by despair that goes unnoticed until it is too late. As the case settled into history, one of the most painful aspects for those left behind was how ordinary everything had seemed right up until the end. There was no dramatic final argument anyone could point to, no explosive confrontation, no moment where someone said, "That's when we should have known." Christina Riggs had gone to work. She had picked up her children. She had paid money she owed. She had answered questions calmly. To the outside world, she was still functioning, and that normality haunted people. Her co-workers replayed small interactions in their minds: a quiet shift, a polite nod, a tired smile. Nothing that suggested catastrophe, nothing that suggested danger. Her family replayed conversations, short phone calls, routine visits, familiar patterns. And her mother replayed that final afternoon, again and again. The last time she saw her grandchildren alive, the last time she saw her daughter free. There was no warning sign she could point to and say, that was it. That absence of warning became one of the most unsettling parts of the story, because it meant that Christina's despair had been invisible, not just to strangers, but to the people closest to her. In the years that followed, when journalists and researchers looked back at Christina's life, they found a pattern that only made sense in hindsight. A child who learned early that pain should be endured quietly. A teenager who numbed herself instead of speaking. A young woman who gave up a child for adoption and never fully recovered from the guilt. An adult who chose a caring profession but never learned how to care for herself. A mother who loved her children, but believed she was failing them beyond repair. Each piece alone did not predict tragedy. Together, they formed a slow collapse. One of the most heartbreaking details to emerge later was how Christina viewed herself as a mother. She did not see her love as enough. She measured herself entirely by outcomes, whether her children were easy, whether they caused trouble, whether others complained. Every complaint felt like a verdict. Every exhausted caregiver comment felt like rejection. And because Christina already believed she was fundamentally flawed, those moments confirmed what she feared most, that her children would suffer because of her. By the time she reached the final decision, she was no longer thinking in terms of right and wrong as others do. She was thinking in terms of ending pain, even if that belief was tragically mistaken. When the execution was over and the case faded from daily headlines, Christina Riggs did not become a symbol everyone agreed on. Some remembered her only as a mother who committed an unforgivable act. Others remembered her as a woman whose illness consumed her before anyone realized how deep it ran. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. The story left them uneasy, because it did not offer comfort. It did not offer a clear villain. It did not offer redemption. It offered only loss. Justin and Shelby were remembered by family members in small, personal ways. Favorite toys, habits, smiles, moments that never had time to grow into memories of adulthood. Their lives were not defined by the crime, but by the love they experienced in the short time they were alive. Christina Riggs was remembered more complicatedly, as someone capable of care and harm, as someone who loved deeply and failed catastrophically, as someone who accepted responsibility but could not forgive herself. And perhaps that is why her story continues to be told. Not because it is shocking, but because it forces a confrontation with something uncomfortable. That a person can be responsible, remorseful, and deeply ill all at once, and that systems built around punishment struggle to know what to do with that reality. In the end, Christina Riggs's life did not resolve into a lesson with clean edges. It ended in silence. And that silence continues to echo in discussions, in documentaries, in the uneasy feeling people are left with after hearing her story. Because it reminds us that despair does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lives quietly, behind routines, behind responsibility, behind a face that looks like it's coping. And by the time it finally becomes visible, the cost is already irreversible. In the years after Christina Riggs' execution, one thing became increasingly clear to those who revisited the case. There was no single moment when everything went wrong. There was no dramatic collapse. What happened was quieter than that. Christina's life was shaped by accumulation. Pain layered on top of pain. Guilt layered on top of guilt. Responsibility layered on top of exhaustion. Each layer alone was survivable. Together, they became crushing. As a child, she learned that pain was something to be endured privately. As a teenager, she learned that mistakes followed you forever. As a young woman, she learned that love came with conditions. As an adult, she learned that asking for help felt like failure. By the time she became a mother, Christina had internalized a dangerous belief that her worth was measured entirely by how well she prevented others from suffering. So when she believed she was failing her children, her sense of worth collapsed with it. People often ask why Christina didn't reach out for help, but those who understood her best said she didn't believe help would change anything. She believed she was the problem, not her circumstances, not her mental health, not her lack of support. That belief mattered, because it meant that solutions like therapy, medication adjustments, family intervention, or community help never felt real to her. They felt temporary, insufficient, pointless. By the time she made her decision, She wasn't choosing between options. She believed there were none. That is why, after the crime, Christina did not fight the system. She did not argue that she deserved another chance. She did not ask for sympathy. She believed the punishment fit not just the crime, but who she believed she was. In that sense, her execution did not feel like something imposed on her. It felt like something she accepted. And that acceptance continues to disturb people who study the case, because it challenges the idea that punishment always conflicts with self-destruction. In Christina's case, they aligned. That alignment left everyone uncomfortable. Judges, lawyers, doctors, observers. When Christina was gone, there was no one left to explain herself further. Only records remained: transcripts, letters, evaluations, memories. And each of them told the same story from a different angle. A woman who loved her children deeply. A woman who believed she was harming them by living. A woman who made an irreversible choice. A woman who could not forgive herself afterward. As time passed, Christina Riggs became less of a headline and more of a cautionary presence. Her story was discussed quietly among healthcare workers, talking about burnout and depression. Among social workers, talking about isolation. Among parents, talking about fear and failure. Not because people sympathized with what she did, but because they recognized pieces of her emotional world. The exhaustion, the guilt, the feeling of being one step away from collapse while appearing fine. Justin and Shelby's names were spoken less often in public discussion, but never forgotten by family. Their lives were remembered in fragments, birthdays that never came, milestones that never happened, futures that were taken before they could form. And Christina Riggs remained frozen in time, 28 years old, forever defined by her final act. There was no redemption arc, no late revelation, no final twist, just a life that narrowed until it ended. That is why her story remains one of the most unsettling in true crime history. Not because it is mysterious, but because it is clear. Clear in its progression. Clear in its tragedy. Clear in its consequences. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this. If you had met Christina Riggs weeks before everything happened, you would not have seen a monster. You would have seen a tired nurse, a struggling mother, a quiet woman trying to hold herself together. And that reality forces a question that lingers long after the story ends. How many people around us are carrying pain we never see, and how much can be lost before we notice? In the end, what unsettles people most about Christina Marie Riggs is not only what she did, but how quietly her life collapsed before it happened. There was no single villain in her story, no dramatic betrayal, no moment where everything clearly went wrong. Instead, there was a woman who learned early to survive by staying silent. She survived childhood trauma by keeping it to herself. She survived teenage pregnancy and loss by moving forward without processing it. She survived adulthood by working, caring, and suppressing her own needs. Each survival came at a cost. By the time Christina became a mother, she carried years of unresolved pain, guilt, and fear. She loved her children deeply, but she did not trust herself. Every difficulty felt like proof that she was failing them. Every complaint felt like judgment. Every moment of exhaustion felt like confirmation that she wasn't enough. And because she did not believe she deserved help, she did not ask for it. That belief, more than any single event, shaped the outcome. When Christina reached the final stage of her depression, her world became narrow and rigid. She stopped seeing time as something that could change things. She stopped believing in growth, in healing, or in the idea that her children's lives could unfold differently from the future she feared. What remained was certainty. A certainty that felt moral to her, even as it was tragically wrong. After the crime, Christina did not attempt to rewrite history. She did not deny her actions. She did not shift blame. She did not claim misunderstanding. She accepted responsibility fully. But she also accepted death. That acceptance continues to trouble people because it blurs lines we're used to keeping separate. Crime and punishment, illness and responsibility, justice and mercy. Her execution closed the legal case, but it did not close the questions. Could someone have reached her sooner? Could treatment have changed her thinking? Should someone who wants to die be allowed to choose execution? Those questions have no clear answers. What is clear is the cost. Justin and Shelby lost their lives before they had the chance to become who they were meant to be. A family lost not only 2 children, but a daughter. And a society was left with a case that refuses to sit comfortably in any category. Christina Riggs was not a mystery. She was not a stranger. She was not a symbol created for headlines. She was a real person whose suffering went unseen until it became irreversible. That is why her story still resonates. Because it reminds us that the most devastating tragedies are not always loud. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they are hidden. Sometimes they look like someone simply getting through the day. And by the time the truth becomes visible, there is no way back. This is not a story meant to excuse. It is a story meant to understand. Because understanding is the only way tragedies like this ever have a chance of being prevented. And that is why this case still matters. If this story made you pause, think, or reflect, like this video. If you have thoughts about this case, or about how society handles mental illness and responsibility, leave a comment. And for more long-form, carefully researched true crime documentaries that go beyond the headlines, hit subscribe to Beyond the Case